Mami. Greetings and welcome to Independent Voice. Thank you so much for joining us again. In today's video, I have Mr. Fouad's colleagues and friends to help us wrap up the biography of Mr. Fouad. Allow me to introduce to you Dr. Gakoussi, who happens to be a French national of Rwandan origin, and Mr. Berhane Assefa, who is also an American national with Ethiopian origin. First and foremost, I want to say thank you to both of you for being here. Mr. Fouad and I spent, as you have noticed, about 4.5 hours on his biography, and it was just beautiful listening to his biography. And I'm glad we get to do this so that, you know, there is a reflection, there is somebody behind it. You guys have shared that amazing experience one way or another. So first and foremost, I want to say thank you. You want to say hi to everyone, that's great, but introduce and welcome your guests. So without any further ado, please go ahead, Mr. Fouad, take the floor.
Hello, everybody. Thank you to Berhane and Kenyas to have honored this medium with your presence. But let me start by thanking first Mami, who is the owner of Independent Voice, and whom I had a great pleasure to know, and with whom I had a great pleasure also to work in preparing this interview. She did a great job facilitating excellently, and I am so grateful for what we did. And thank you also to Mr. Berhane Assefa. And Berhane is my childhood friend, first and foremost, my brother. And he is also a previous colleague and a very senior CEO today. He had gone through many international institutions as well. And coming to Dr. Gakoussi, he's one of my best friends as well. We live together here in Paris. He's a great man of integrity, and we were working in my last institution, which was African Development Bank, with a work that was relating rather to ethics, accountability, good governance. With this, I will let the program flow, and I will re-intervene when given opportunity. Thank you, Mame.
Absolutely, thank you for that. So you guys are lucky to have had the opportunity to work with a wonderful individual as Mr. Fouad. Even though I haven't had a chance to listen to your biography, I'm going to say thank you so much for who you are, what you've done, because his biography is probably somehow a reflection of what you all have accomplished and contributed to humanity. So my turn to say thank you. So with that said, I think the first thing we're going to do is if you can take turns and talk about your reflection. What was your first impression? If you can maybe take a few minutes and then maybe we'll open it up for different questions and whatnot. But how'd you come across the video? What was your first impression? What do you think about the content itself, things he talked about? Were you reminded of anything at all? So if we can begin with Dr. Gakoussi, if you could take a few minutes and then we'll continue from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mami, for organizing this interview. And also thanks to Ismael for sharing his long and varied experience. I remember well the first time I met Fouad in the office of his boss, and the boss was a friend of mine. So I went there, and he said, "This man is Ismael Fouad. He's been recruited to be chief ethic officer, and he comes from France." So as I came from France also, I was saying that there was a link, but which didn't really materialize that time. So, but I could remember my first impression on him. You know, he comes from a humanitarian organization. I could see that it was like he was looking for some people to help. well, later on, he helped me a lot, surviving some, overcoming some challenges. So actually, ethics, where he was working, and evaluation have some common ground. We have, as like in medicine, the work we are doing, we have to avoid doing harm. And we have to be sure that we are doing the right things and we are doing them right. So those two principles are principles I find in Ismael all the time in his work. Was trying to be sure that things were doing the right things. And if they were doing the right things, if they were doing them right. I remember one day having some discussion with managers and Ismael, and what he was telling them, you need to manage by example. You have this big institution, you meet people with different background, different perspectives, different interests. So imagine that you have such a society where you have always conflict. So Ismael was always able to help people understand the principle, the standard of the organization. So from the inside, that is what I know from him, and I know he made a difference. I know that when he decided to complete his career, so many people really were sad to see, not to see Ismael in the institution again.
That's a good starting point. And a couple of things that you had mentioned, which is leading by example. He's very much principled. You touched on very, very much of a strong core value of his. So thank you so much for sharing that. All right, let's move on to Ato or Mr. Berhane Assefa. What was your first impression? How'd you come across the video? What can you tell us about Mr. Fouad that he didn't say?
Well, I think, I came the video through Fouad, actually. He's the one who shared the interview with me. Obviously, Fouad and I had discussed about his experience. We shared experiences. And he led and lived a very fascinating life. I mean, I was introduced to working in the humanitarian field because of Fouad. I didn't know anything before I met him, but since I met him, through him, I learned a lot. And also, I knew that he had a very rich experience that was worth sharing. And he was always, I think, as Inez said, and as Fouad said, he's always willing to share and help others, to share his experience and say, what are we going to do for the next generation? I mean, we do what we do now, but what kind of impact are we going to leave for the next generation? And that was in Fouad's mind all along. So him and I had a lot of discussion about this. But one thing about Fouad is, personally, he's very easygoing. He can get along with anybody in any circle, in any circumstance. You put him in front of very high level dignitaries, and he can carry on a conversation and be serious. You put him in another setting with much younger, hip young people, and Fouad can also carry the conversation. So he has that gift, I guess, where he is, he can communicate easily with people. He's a global citizen in every sense of the word, but most importantly, he has this fascinating gift of languages. He speaks numerous languages. He speaks them flawlessly and fluently. And that also allows him to communicate with people with ease. So his experience is rich, his experience is vast. I'm very happy to contribute a little bit about that and to also help him tell his stories, because a lot of times people are they tell their stories, but they leave out things when they feel that, it's not their place to talk about it. I'm here to tell folks to fill in the blanks and tell, no, this is not the entire story. He actually did more than that. I've seen him in a work environment and social environments, but he has a vast experience that many young people can benefit from. And I'm very happy to be part of the discussion. So yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Awesome. Some tells me he didn't necessarily talk about everything because he tends to be modest, right?
Yes.
Modesty is a good thing, but even after 5 hours, I figured there's more to him than he let us believe. But I'm so glad you guys are here to fill the blank. You also mentioned some significant points, which is fascinating life, to have to lead and live a fascinating life. I think I'm going to put that in the back of my head somewhere. That's such a blessing to be able to lead and live a fascinating life for others to witness. Sometimes it's easy for us to say, hey, look at my life. But when others get to see it and they can be a witness to it, I think it's such an amazing experience. So thank you for sharing that. It's not about putting him on a pedestal or anything like that. It's about the next generation learning from life experience.
Well, let me interject something. I think you said something there that I think I should highlight. When people talk about helping others or the humanitarian, there are people obviously who worked in the humanitarian world, and there are other people who know the theory of humanitarian world or worked in a setting that was not as interesting as was. If I count, and I might miss some of the places he's been, he's seen a lot in his professional life. As a child, that's a different story. We've all, in our generation who grew up in Ethiopia, we've seen quite a few, but that's cuts across. But in his professional career, I don't think people, or even myself, appreciate the places he's been to, the places he has seen, the assistance that he, through the organizations that he worked for, have provided. I know for a fact, correct me if I miss some places, Fufu, but he's talking about Somalia, we're talking about some war-torn places in Ethiopia, we're talking about Libya, we're talking about the earthquake in Iran, and some other places in Africa where there was a dire emergency. So Fouad, firsthand, I think he's seen what people can do to people, because some of these emergencies are created by other people, by human beings, and there are also natural disasters like earthquakes and so on and so forth. So I think his desire to share that is, to some extent, to teach the young generation that some of this stuff could be avoided, right? At least the emergencies or the suffering that is created by other human beings can be averted or reduced. So I think he has a lot of wealth of information to share because of the stuff that he has seen. And I think that's where the Fufu's desire to kind of tell the story comes from there. And he's telling the story by telling his story, by sharing the experiences that he has seen. He tries to be the voice of the people that he has helped or tried to help in his life. So yeah, so I think that's what I wanted to highlight. He's seen a lot, he's been to a lot of places, he met with a lot of people, and he's also seen the emergencies that were created that could have avoided. I guess that's the right word for it.
That's absolutely true. And he does highlight some of that in his biography too, where he talks about, what humanity does to humanity and where humanity is heading, type of thing. So thank you so much for reiterating and highlighting that. What about you, Dr. Gakusi?
I was lucky to have time to listen to the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
When we were living in Tunisia and in Abidjan, I had time to discuss with Ismael, but we were it is also like a battlefield of development. So there were so many challenges. So we are mostly discussing about the work. Sometimes we'll discuss also on personal aspects. And I really think that Ismail can be proud of himself to see all these experiences he went through and how he's been able to overcome difficulties at each step since his childhood. Sometimes when we were discussing, he would tell me, well, I went to Djibouti, I went to, I lived in Morocco. We didn't have time to go into details. When I was listening to him in his interview, I was, wow, how has he been able to do all these things? Sometimes I may say that I am almost jealous not to have so diversified experience going in so different countries. I am not sure that I would have been able to cope with all hardships. Going to see people who are dying, helping people who don't have anything. Some are dying and still continue doing these different several years. I remember even asking Ismail, look, when we have difficulties, we come discuss with you. You give us good advice. Then you go back very strong. We go ahead with our work. But you, who can help you? Because you cannot come to me. I am not qualified to provide the same quality of advice. That is one point. The second point I want to comment on is about what Ismail said on difficulties he had in Djibouti and in Ethiopia, where he was declared persona non grata. Although you felt, you suffered from being rejected, going back to your country. When I listened to what he was saying, I remembered his experience. I said, well, they made a mistake on him, but it can be also something possible. Yes, so I really think that the experience of Ismail is particularly rich, and I am happy that he was able to put together ideas he has on his experience, so as he can share, his experience with anybody who wants to learn from such rich experience.
Awesome. Thank you so much, and thank you for bringing up, in a nutshell, the work ethics and his stamina to be able to overcome all those challenges. So that led me to bring up a question to Mr. Fouad. So what is it that helped you overcome all of that, including from the beginning when you guys were going through stuff in Ethiopia, the situation in Ethiopia, through all the different places that we've heard being listed as a humanitarian person or as a humanitarian personnel, whatever position you were holding? What do you think helped you really sustain that level of stamina, that level of passion, commitment, dedication? What would you say helped you do that?
Thank you, Mame. And I was listening very carefully. And first, what I would like to say is that I am very, very, very humble with the sayings of Mr. Berhane and Dr. Ekusi. I was even rendered a little bit emotional for that matter, because first it takes you back into history, and your mind functions in a way that some images appear while they were talking. What they said is pretty much the exact copy of what we discussed, you and I, Mame, but also with them back then, sometimes 20, 30 years back for Berhane, and during the last 15 years with Gakusi. So in their account, they have confirmed some of the ways that we were confronting some difficulties together sometimes, and finding solutions, etc. And thank you to both of you for your witnessing. But to resiliently continue to do what we have done, first and foremost is conviction. Conviction of what you want to do and for whom you're doing it and to what objective. So from the beginning, as Berhane said, getting out of the country, of our own motherland, with grief and even trauma and sadness, then God helping you to succeed in your studies, being able to go and prove to the others that, okay, I have gone maybe through hard times in my younghood. Now that I can, because the God-given gift that you have to gain some studies, some knowledge, and go back and give back to society by itself is the greatest asset that you have to overcome any problem you're faced with, and especially what in the empirical experience made you continue every time and each time from country to country is when you come into an emergency, and Doctors Without Borders is one of these institutions that is the first one to be in the scene of crisis, whether it is a war or a natural disaster. Boom, they're the first one to be on the field. They have that capacity. And when you come, it's just chaos everywhere, turmoil everywhere. 1 week after that, your hospital is up and running, you're running the water, you have latrines, pam, 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 everyone is getting back to normal, you know, and you start having kids playing football in the yard of the hospital. That simple smile that you get from those kids tells you it's worth it. That's why I'm here, you see? So this is the first layer of the resilience and what kept us ongoing. And then the other point is what Berhane was saying, is that once you do such things, it's no more about you. Because as we were struggling, our time also is passing by, and when you reach 50 or 60, you want to give back to others that can take over. So it's about, yeah, I had the opportunity and the chance to learn this, see this, witness this. I had to pass it on to the younger generation, showing them there is also other way of intervening in our world, not only political, not only business, money making, but you can also evolve in the world by doing some other things. So this is also another drive that keeps you ongoing. Yeah, I'll stop it there and give the opportunity for others to add if they have to add something. Thank you, Bame.
Of course, thank you. Go ahead. Yes.
A small thing from Ismael, and this is related to what he was doing. It fits well with ethics. He is someone who sticks to very high standard, and if you go beyond these standards, he cannot compromise with that. For me, it was very important because even if we are friends, when I discuss with him, I know that he will not necessarily buy my argument if they don't respond to this standard.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
No, what I think the integrity is a given, but there's also the passion. Whatever you decide to do in life, you do it with a passion. You love what you do. So Fufu spent most of his adult life, or all of his adult life, in the humanitarian world. He's dedicated to it. He loves it, and he does it passionately, with integrity. And one thing that, and he's always talking about passing your experience to the next generation. I think one of the things that comes across to me is everybody's going to decide to do what they want to do in the future with their life, every person. But there are two things that Fouad does very well. One is to do it with a passion, love what you do. And the second one, do it honestly and with integrity. So if those two messages are communicated to the next generation, whether you decide to be a butcher, a baker, a banker, or a humanitarian, if you have those things, I think you'll be okay. And I think when we try to simplify and summarize what he said, I think it boils down to those two things, because he's really, really passionate. And like Anaya said, he doesn't compromise. If he sets a standard, he sets a standard. And like also Fufu said, I think I worked with him, and I in the office, when he's very demanding, but outside of the office, it's a different story. Fufu can play, he can party, he can have a good time. But in the office, if things have to be done, they have to be done on time, and they have to be done correctly, and there is no compromise. It doesn't matter. You're his best friend, or it doesn't matter. So that I find it fascinating. I really, and yeah, I mean, this is one thing that should be emphasized and amplified over.
Thank you.
This is amazing. So I'm going to start like from bottom up, from what you just said. You guys highlighted high standard, no compromise there, 100% hands down. There is no compromise in anything at all, right? I'm learning. Let's just say that I'm learning to, not that I don't have high standard, but to continue to push for that high standard, for that a better way of doing things. A standard is a standard, but where do you put that standard? And you said it really nicely. It doesn't matter what it is that you do. Whatever it is you're doing, do it with the highest standard you can do it. I think is the best lesson that we're learning. And integrity, passion, honesty is the driving force, right? If you could be in the most powerful position or coveted position, but if you don't show integrity, if you don't have a passion for it, what good is it? You guys have worked with him for many, many years. And I've heard Mr. Berhane call you Fufu. For our listeners who do not know, Fufu is his other name. He's also known as Fufu. And I think growing up, people called him Fufu. That to me says a lot. Even though you guys have worked, you've seen him in action. As you speak, all the expectations, the demand and all that stuff. But then you get to call him Fufu. That says a lot. When you're on that field and you have to do what you got to do, he's maybe Mr. Fouad or still Fufu, but doesn't mean that just because you get to be friends, and you said it, when it's work, and then outside of that, he becomes then the person that we all know, Mr. Fufu. It's an amazing experience to to hear you guys talk about how wonderful it is, even though he has certain level of expectation and demand for perfection. It's not a bad thing at all. The reason why we're doing this is so that the next generation, whoever is listening to this video, this conversation, it really isn't about highlighting a person. It's about their experience, you guys' experience. What we're saying is, if you have a passion for whatever it is you're doing, you can excel at it, have the highest standard for whatever it is you're doing. And this is what happens when you do it that way. Resilience is another thing that was also mentioned. Talk about resilience. We all, I think, have experienced resilience by just being from Ethiopia. You know what I mean? Just from being from Africa, we all have experienced a level of resilience. And it's such an amazing thing to hear you guys talk about it.
Mhm.
It's not about self. When he said it really isn't about self, I was thinking then it must be because you're so content you don't mind sharing.
Mhm.
Up until you're able to share and give it out, it's just not going to multiply, because then it will remain what it is, just within us. It's not
Mhm.
always about me, myself, and I. If you're not content about what it is that you have, if you're not satisfied, you're not going to think about in the future. You're not going to say, what am I doing, or what am I contributing to the next generation? So when you listened, however much of the video you have listened, or when you think about Mr. Fouad, what would be a question or two you would pose to him today?
Can I say something before we go to that? I just want to share one experience, and I don't know how. I'm sure he remembers it. Maybe he doesn't, but I'm sure he does. One of the things also I'd like to mention about in Amharic, it's called Kumnagaranya. I don't know how you say it in English. I don't know if there is somebody who's I don't think serious is the right word, but it's somebody who's very I don't know. When my daughter was born 18 years ago, Fouad was in Dubai, so I called him and he knew my daughter was born. And we were talking about her christening, the christen, which happens about 80 days after birth in the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition. So I called him and he asked me the date. And I said, mind you, I was in Maryland, he was in Dubai. So I said, oh, this is the date. And then he said, we talked about it. So we called each other a few times. You know, he called me from the airport in Washington, D.C. the day before. He flew all the way to Maryland to be at the baptism.
Oh.
It just blew my mind. I mean, my family to this day, my mother, my sisters, everybody talks about it. So this is the kind of person he is too. He never told me he was going to come. He just showed up. He knew it was an important day in my wife's and my life, in our family's life. So he showed up. And this is the kind of person, he surprises you with little things. I mean, not little things, but with things like that are very significant in one's life. And he has a way of doing this. So I just thought I should mention that before we go on to the question you asked.
Thank you,
you so
Berhane.
much.
I remember vividly, yes.
I still have pictures.
I just
Okay.
want to mention something also before we go to the question.
Yeah.
To illustrate the high standard I was mentioning. One day, there was a senior manager disappeared. He had some issues, and then we didn't know where he was. Then I discussed with Ismael, and Ismael told me, forget that it is a senior manager. Just think that it is a human being that you are missing. So when he told me this, I said, this is very strong. So I have to do something. Now I started, trying to find where this person was. But I was really impressed by just forget everything that somebody, a human being, is missing.
Mhm.
So that is something which really impressed me.
It's amazing. It really is an opportunity. It's a wonderful way of learning. Sometimes we sit down and read books and try to read to learn. I think this is an incredible way of learning because it's tested through life. This is real life experience. The humanitarian in him continues to be that, right? It's not something you take off at the end of the day and then you become something else. When he talked about, so what gives you that resilience, or what makes you just going to do the work over and over again? He had mentioned just watching the kids play and smile. That gets you going. That is the true humanitarian experience, right? Like you just want to see, when you see that, that's the fuel. Having to do it over and over again, it's not always the greatest experience. But right after that, when you see that hope coming back, life coming to normalcy, that one child going out there and running around and smiling and kind of giving you that one look to say, kind of sort of thank you. That is a fuel. That's the strength that you pull from, not necessarily just atrocity and kind of stay within the atrocity and be drained. That's how you refuel. So thank you so much for saying that, because I want people to hear that. We don't always have to be in the most glamorous thing to contribute to the world or to make somebody smile. It takes just that for us to collect and re-energize ourselves and continue going. So thank you for mentioning that. It really resonated with me, because it's a beautiful thing to bring that peace, that smile into somebody. And even though you were paying a price, I mean, it was difficult for you guys to have to do the work. But then once that work is done behind the scene and you see the result of it, I think it's beautiful. So thank you so much. Unless you guys have something else you want to highlight, I think we should ask him questions. What do you think? So let's spend maybe a few minutes. If you have any questions, let's ask him a couple questions, and then I'll come back to you guys for final reflection and a message from you. His message really mainly in his biography is, what legacy are we leaving behind? And I'll give you an example that in the very last video, when we tried to wrap it up, the thing that resonated with me so strongly was the example that he had given when he was in Somali and the rebels coming into the homes and digging out that gold, that the Somali ladies buried, in hopes that they're going to come back, dig it out, and rebuild their lives. But not only did they take the gold, they were leaving behind a mine. So if anybody comes in and tries to dig out the stuff, it blows up. It didn't matter who it was. At the start of our conversation, somebody had mentioned what humans do to another human. That is a prime example of what humanity is capable of doing. And there are other ways, is what we had said initially. So with that said, if there is anything you guys would like to reflect on and give out a message from, whether it's working with him, your own experiences, ask a question, and then you guys can reflect back and give a message to the next generation. That would be awesome.
One of the lessons from the life of Ismael is that life is not always easy. It is full of obstacles. And the key is to have the strength to overcome these difficulties. And of course, there is also a factor we don't master, which we can call to have a chance. Some people are able to overcome even very tough difficulties. Some are stuck, some even die. So that is the lesson I can draw from the interviews. Now, a question to Ismael. If you had to start your life, would you like to live the same life, or what else would you like to, or what would you like to do differently?
Wow.
That's powerful.
Wow.
I think for me, there is the saying, I think maybe it's been oversaid, maybe it's a cliche. Think globally, act locally, right? I mean, people say that all the time. I think Fouad lived that. I think he really lived that. He really did what he could as an individual to dedicate his life to humanitarian work, but also in his personal life, not only working for a humanitarian organization, doing what he's supposed to do, but also in his personal life, he showed kindness and he showed mercy in his personal life. So for me, it's very difficult to go back to those traumatic events. I mean, most of us who went through trauma in our childhood or whatever, we want to run away from it as much as we can. Some of us don't even want to deal with it, don't even want to think about it. If we go to an emergency situation because of the work, we don't want to go back to that kind of an environment. Most of us say, I've done this, now I want to go to somewhere where it's peaceful, quiet, and I want to have a peaceful life. Somehow Fouad ends up there. He ends up there, he comes back more energized, he does what he's supposed to do, and then he tends to go back. So I think he lived his life to the fullest. He did exactly what he wanted to do. That I really, really admire and appreciate. But I think the the biggest message for me is not everybody can do what Fouad did. It requires certain personality, but I think the biggest lesson for me, as I stated earlier, is be kind, do your work with integrity, and do the work that you enjoy the most and do it well. I mean, if that message is communicated to everybody, I think that is the key takeaway. As far as questions are concerned, I think what motivates you to go back to those situations? Because, you know, for me, I do it for a certain amount of time, but then it just physically, emotionally drains me. To see that kind of suffering emotionally, physically drains me, and it's going to take me a long time even to go back to that kind of situation. So for me, is what is the fuel that drives you to go back to the same kind of situations over and over? I think that's the question.
Two big questions. Well. I think when writing the two questions, they are interrelated. One goes with the other. And first of all, I think what Mame said at the beginning of this discussion session was in the wrap up. Doing such job requires to also think globally, meaning when you have an understanding, not only in the perspective and context of your motherland, but having seen other contexts around the world, you are more keen to understanding what is at play. Why this havoc, why this turmoil, why this context here and there, even the natural catastrophes, as now we better understand it with the climate change and everything, it's mainly man-made problem. So in the first place, if I was reborn, as Gakusi says it, would I do the same life, or what different thing I would do? Or when Berhane says, what pushed you really to go back time and again in the same kind of context? And I said that they were linked and intertwined. And Mame did it very well in the interview. Everything starts with the beginning. When you have the way I was born and came to the world and grew up in that context with all the little details that I gave, and there were much more to it, but I wanted to be transparent, but I wanted also to be discreet in some aspects. But I think I gave enough in the giving hints of how things have started. And if there was something I would change, I would say to everybody, not only in Africa, but in the world. When there is a family that you are founding, make sure that you take your responsibility to the fullest, so that the God-given gift that you get through your kids, that God is giving you, that responsibility, you have to do it very properly, because you are the first one to implement in those kids the first seeds that will become tomorrow the flowers. If that link is somehow disturbed or disappears or is cut, then we can have a seed that will not become a flower. Okay, that in the way it will be dying, or it will be bitter, or it will be maybe a monster like me, which will forget about himself and go to helping others because we need to change this. So what kept me going was first that we need to change, because through all this contexts, various contexts in which I went time and again, as Berhane said, relentlessly, and I enjoyed it most of the time. One thing that I would do differently, as Yakusi put it, is that my understanding now of the world is, after 50 years, I would say now, is that the world in which we are living does not function properly. We had made certainly lots of discoveries, lots of studies, beautiful things were created. We went even up to Mars and whatever. But the systems that we had put in place are not equitable and balanced. So all this are genuine questions to which I have genuine answers, which is a reform of the international system itself, which is completely inequitable and is not taking everyone on the same footing. The last few hours, what we saw is a video of the previous French president, who was saying that the most savage continent is the European continent, who had made very bad things to other continents and countries in Africa and elsewhere. It's bizarre to hear this from a president that was one of the instigators who participated in the destruction of Libya, for example. So these kind of change of situations, mindsets within one person of a superpower is already telling you a lot. So those things, in the course of my work for the last 30 and something years, I was witnessing them in real, not only by reading, but in real, in the projects that we were implementing, or in the African Development Bank, when we were dealing with the projects and the fundings, we could see that there were these imbalances. And we could always discuss hours and hours sitting around a table about how to reform this so that everything should be equitable for everybody. We have the same equal footing in everything that we engage into in the development of our world, is something that kept me always going. And now, if I had to restart, yes, I would start first with the reform of all these institutions, first and foremost. But the work and the heart that I put previously, I will re-put again, because I loved this work, as both of them said, with passion and impartially. And for the next generation, it's, as Berhane beautifully put it, it's, yeah, be passionate, be integral, and do it cleanly. But the word is yours, you know, don't be biased by either one party or the other. See the word on equal footing and bring your print with integrity and love. And I will yield my mic. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Mr. Fouad. The world is yours. What a powerful message. What are we doing with it? The world was given to us in such a perfect shape. There's nothing wrong with it. Perfect. Look what's happening to it. But as the individual that we're talking about today, that has seen it for 30 some years, and what we're capable of doing to each other, to humanity, the world is yours, to me, is the biggest message today. The question that was presented to you is so powerful, and I know it means a lot. Would you do it again? All over again? I think the answer is yes. Did you hear? Did you guys, do you agree? I think I heard yes, he would do it again. that says a lot about passion, compassion, integrity. It's an amazing opportunity for anybody to find out, figure out, search, and find what it is that we're truly passionate about and go do that. I think that's the difference. Most of us go through life trying so many different things, trying to figure out what it is we're meant to be and what it is that we're meant to do. But when you really truly find that passion, it makes it easier to do it again and again and again, even if it means going to a war zone, even if it means watching humanity destruct itself, even if it means heartache, even if it means after every now and then having to go talk to a psychiatrist because you yourself have to heal. So thank you for the question. Thank you for the answer. What I would ask right now is, what would you say in one word to the next generation based on the things that you've experienced, you've witnessed, the video, and then based on what we just talked about and reflected, if you were to say to the next generation in one word, what would come to mind? I'm going to start with Mr. Berhane.
One word.
It's a challenge.
It's a challenge. I think it's perseverance, maybe perseverance.
Thank you.
In one word, I would say that we should continue believing in human progress.
Okay. Mr. Fouad, in one word, what would you say to the next generation?
Love,
Wonderful.
with no hesitation.
Right? Always. I will add to it always. That's my last word.
Say love, not war.
Yes,
Yes.
it continues. So love, always, not war. I so appreciate your time, your guests, for being here with us on Independent Voice. I'm so honored and humbled to have you here. Thank you for all that you have done and continue to do. And I would like to say, on behalf of our listeners, thank you so much for everything you have done to teach us today what humanity is all about, especially when you could have chosen so many different fields. For you to remain in the humanitarian world and to continue to mend humanity, to heal humanity. We are indebted to you all. Your legacy should continue. And if we can encourage one person to listen to you guys and say, you know what, I want to pick up that baton and I want to continue that legacy. I want to step into the world of humanitarian work and do what they had done, because we need more people like you. Not that we need more atrocities that we would have to do such thing, but people that care about humanity, people that could see humanity from a different angle. We need more of you guys, but for what you have done throughout your lifetime, on behalf of our listeners, I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart, including Mr. Fouad right over here. It has become a mirror for a whole lot of us to say, so what about my life? What am I to do with this life? What's my legacy? What do I pass on to the next generation? And I will close this with one word I will borrow from Mr. Fouad. The world is yours.